It looks like we are live now. We've got we should be live. Okay, so we are definitely live now. I am going to be joined by none other than Richard Seale, whom I believe is the best rum distiller in the world. He is a phenomenal advocate too for pure rum, traditional rum, and he's probably the best orator I have ever met when it comes to talking about your beliefs in a particular style of spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show the one, the only Richard Seale, the only man who hates vodka more than I do. Welcome to the show, Richard.
It's probably true.
It is absolutely.
Finally found a use for vodka, though. Hand sanitizer.
That's right. So we do have people who we do have people who are watching this from all over the world, and they will be asking questions. Now, I can only accept questions from those people who are on YouTube. Unlike my normal setup, I cannot see the questions on Twitter or Facebook. So if you're either on Facebook or Twitter, you need to make sure you go over to the YouTube. I provided a link, and you can go there and you can ask Richard a question. I'll go ahead and start it off. Yesterday, we talked about how Barbados is closed down. They're not allowing him to export, but he was able to get most of his rum into the U.S. market before those restrictions were applied. So, Richard, the first question comes in from Douglas Pendleton. He asks, basically, why do you hate vodka?
Because, well, okay, I suppose we need to be, obviously, whenever we make generalizations, we always need to be careful. So please understand that I'm speaking about, that mainstream vodka, which is really just pure alcohol. And the reason why you can sell people pure alcohol for lots of money is because vodka really borrows the craft and artisanship of the spirits world that we associate with the spirits world and places it on a mass-produced industrial product that is no more valuable than a Coca-Cola. So it basically steals, if it was sold as pure alcohol, ethanol 40%, potable ethanol 40%, no one would pay anything for it. No one would boast that their potable ethanol brand was smoother than the other brand. No one would boast that they can find distinct differences between these two potable ethanol brands. It is only because it takes the aura and the prestige and all of the attributes that we associate with distilled spirits making or wine making and places it in that category, even though it's just pure alcohol. And often the reason why you prefer one brand over another is nothing more than some added glycerin or some added sugar. And, the differences between two vodkas, sometimes people boast to me, well, I can distinguish between brand X and brand Y. And I say, fine, I could distinguish between brand X fuel alcohol from one plant and brand Y fuel alcohol from another plant. It's meaningless. In other words, when you have a difference between a Jamaican rum or a Barbados rum or two different bourbons or Scotch versus bourbon, these are differences which are interesting differences driven by culture, history, skill, choices. These are not arbitrary distinctions that come out between two industrial plants. So yes, that's why I hate vodka. It's basically a mug's game, if you buy vodka. But I did preempt that with that generalization, because one of the things that is happening is that there is a small crew of people, and you're seeing it more with the craft distillers, where they are trying to make basically something very light, but they are trying to leave some character from the raw material. I know of one good friend of mine who distills, potato vodka, and he leaves as much character in it as, say, grain whiskey would. And but he knows if he writes potato spirit on the label, it won't sell, so he puts vodka on the label. But it's a very, very nice spirit, because it's a very nice potato distilled spirit. It has a nice flavor, but that's not vodka, of course, as we know it. It's just an interesting development who it's kind of reversed now. They're borrowing the aura of vodka to sell actually genuine spirits. So that's a good development.
Well, we got a lot more questions coming in. Again, folks, if you want to ask a question, you have to go to YouTube to ask the question. We're not able to see your questions if you are watching this stream through Twitch, Facebook, or Twitter. So make sure you go to the link that's provided to you in your respective feed, and go to YouTube if you want to ask a question. This one comes from, and I'm sorry if I butchered this name, but good first name, by the way, Frederick Granloff. He asks, if you could bring back one discontinued rum, which rum would that be?
Oh boy. Discontinued rum. Because I don't, to sort of properly answer that question, you have to be very familiar with a lot of discontinued rums. That's a very, very good question. I think I can probably only answer that in maybe a more broad context. In the past, Barbados rum was made 100% pot still. It was made with a very high formulas with both juice and molasses, but with very high levels of juice. So I'd like to probably bring back that style, because it's authentic. It's in the history books, and it's genuinely Barbados. In other words, it's still our way of carving out our direction. But still, to try and answer the actual question, discontinued rum. Oh my word. I know that they are, I think that it would be a good idea, and I think there's some people working on it, to bring back the style of rum, the style of Jamaican rum that was the sort of the original punch rum, the original Mai Tai, the original Planter's Punch style of rum that was very popular. So this was a rum, Jamaican, but very high in caramel, which was part of the practices of the time. Because I remember going to Steve Remsburg house, and he would make Planter's Punch with 1940s Myers, and it was quite marvelous. He would pull out his bottles of, because he had copious bottles of, and it was sold as Myers Planter's Punch rum, and it was, a far cry from the Myers of today. And so he'd make Planter's Punch at home with this vintage of rum. I think if you could pull that one out, that would be quite good.
Yeah, those old Myers were really quite special. They really were. Mm-hmm. These questions keep coming in. I am Robbins ask, and this is a really good question. How much experimentation is happening at Foursquare right now? Are there any experimental single casts just sitting around? We might have some breaking news on this one.
we never call it experiments. It's I enjoy the fact in a way that people think that I'm being brave, but I'm not being brave or experimental. So to sort of answer the question, I showed yesterday for anyone who watched, remember those Sauterne barrels?
Mm-hmm.
So last year was the first year I used Sauterne barrels. And I had always been a little resistant to using Sauterne barrels because wines or spirit barrels, use a spirit barrel, there's no real risk of the spirit going off. In other words, when you empty the bourbon barrel and ship in the empty barrel, there's no spoilage risk. Same thing with the fortified wines. But a Sauterne barrel, sweet wine, low alcohol, there's a serious risk that I could get a barrel and it absolutely, by the time it reached me, it stunk. We prepped it carefully at the chateau, and they were brilliant. They came, and but again, the reason why I say I don't like to call it experimentation is that when you think of Sauternes, they buy some of the best barrels on the market. So I see it as playing very, very, very safe and going out and buying the best barrel I can get my hands on. Mm-hmm. So one perspective is, oh my goodness, you're experimenting with Sauterne barrels, but I see it as I'm buying really, really superb barrels that were picked by an excellent Sauterne chateau who can afford to buy the creme de la creme of barrel. It's the same thing I've been doing now, just again along the lines of the question in terms of experiments. I have been using wine barrels for a couple of years now, as opposed to fortified wine barrels. And again, normally the risk is, we don't want wine barrels, or they're not as, but I've been using them and it's been going well. But again, it's the same principle. I buy from French oak barrels. Central Sauternes are French oak barrels from one of the best winemakers on the planet. So they go out and they buy the absolute best creme de la creme of wine barrels. I mean, it costs, to them over €1,000 each. I mean, and so you can call it a bit experimental on my part, but I see it as going with a very, very old-fashioned principle. Put your rum in really excellent barrels, and you're going to get a good result.
Yeah, staying on the topic of barrels, Christopher Hart, whom I know out of Houston, is teasing the fact that you use a lot of Jack Daniel's barrels, and he wanted to know, are there plans for bourbon barrel aged rums from ex-Kentucky bourbon barrels?
No. Well, what I did, I shouldn't say no, because the general plan is that, we call it an ex-bourbon barrel because from the point of view of buying a refill barrel, it's, technically a bourbon barrel. So it's in the market. But of course, yes, they're Jack Daniels. So we will continue to buy our ex-bourbon needs as Jack Daniels. Having said that, we have started to purchase some 6-month bourbon barrels that were, in other words, sort of an exceptional case of bourbon barrel, where they were only used for 6 months. And the reason why we did that is that many years ago, when we thought there was going to be a shortage of bourbon barrels, we purchased new oak, in other words, like a bourbon distillery, so that we could learn and get experience with new oak. And the results have been very good. And I was going to go in the market and buy new oak, and then it was suggested to me to buy some 6-month ones, and I thought that was a good idea. And so we may buy We may buy little bits and pieces of bourbon, as in Kentucky bourbon, where we can get a very where we can get an exceptional barrel. In other words, I'm not going to go to Kentucky bourbon to buy a similar barrel to Jack Daniels. I'm going to go to buy a Kentucky bourbon if I can get a barrel that's substantially different to my Jack Daniels barrel.
Now we have a lot of people who are following right now, and they're on their lunch break, and they're saying things like, "It's time for my lunch pour." You know, like we got Bourbon Finder over here saying like he needs to go and get that pull his desk bourbon out or something. Do you have a lunch pour of a rum that you have around the office for days like this where, you know what, hey, I'm just gonna kick back and sip a little rum at lunch? What do you drink at lunch? Oh, well, yeah, we can't call that an experimentation. That's just a sample bottle.
No, yeah, I do not have a regular lunch pour, but of course I taste rum every single day, and I would be lying to you if I told you that some didn't get swallowed.
Well, Lance Robinson comes in, and I know the answer to this question, but I'll let you tackle it because you obviously will be able to give some great insight onto it. Lance Robinson writes, is it true that you stack your barrels for aging? If so, how many barrels high? And do you see any leakage issues on the bottom row?
Yeah, we do stack. We've been doing that now for a couple of years. In fact, it's kind of amusing to me because when I visited Bourbon sort of 20, 25 years ago, everyone was moving to palletized warehouses. And then, of course, the success of Bourbon over the last, it's been fantastic, and everyone's moving back. And so back then, anything new was a palletized warehouse. Now anything new, of course, is a traditional on the side. So we've stuck with that. We prefer it, except for when it gets very old, then it's probably better on its side. We do now have some racked on the side because, yes, there are cases where we have some sherry barrels that don't like to stand up. So we have some rack-ins for that because they're just simply not designed to stand up. So they'll fall over. We go typically 5 high. We have, in times of need, gone 7 high, and quite often 6 high. We're actually quite surprised. We don't notice. I think when there was 7 high, we did have some concerns about leakage, but between 5 and 6, no, we're not seeing anything. We're not seeing anything other than normal. I mean, normal is you do get some barrels that have leaked. That's life.
Now, this is a process that's common in rum, but it's not in bourbon. And a lot of people who are watching this are bourbon fans and may not really know about this practice. But topping off barrels, how often do you top off barrels that to kind of avoid that over?
Yes. So just to clarify what topping off is. Correct. Topping off is basically a situation where, let's say you have 100 barrels and they're half full, you'll turn them into 50 full barrels. So you don't top them off. I think sometimes people get confused and think that we put young rum into the old rum. No, it's consolidation. We try to top off after 10 years. So what would happen is, I say try because filling barrels and emptying barrels gets greater priority over topping up barrels, because topping up barrels is not as productive as filling them or selling them. But the general principle is after 10 years we'll try to tank it, we'll vat it, because we sell 10-year-old rum, and then what's going past 10 years will get topped up. And so then we can empty again at 12, and the ones that we didn't top up at 10, we top up 12. So we try not to go past 10 years without topping it. But I would be lying to you if I told you that I diligently topped up every barrel.
Okay. So, folks, keep those questions coming in. One more time. Again, we can't take the questions if they're on Facebook or Twitter. So make sure you come on over to YouTube. The channel is live. Just go to Fred Minnick, the channel there. If you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook or Twitter, you will find the direct link to this interview right now. Blake from Bourboner asked a question. I think you know Blake. He asks, how much have you seen the demand in U.S. grow in the past few years, and do you think it will continue?
Yes, well, I guess the broader picture, growth has been spectacular. When you consider, I think the first release of the first ECS release was what, about 2015? I honestly can't remember. We may have taken 2 years to sell it out now. Now we put a release in and it's gone in a few months, and we have, 2 or 3 releases. There's not a fixed schedule, but in practice, there's, 2, 3 releases available at any one time. Yes, it will continue because we're still very, very, very tiny in terms of market share. I mean, rum's market share of the whiskey audience, and that's the thing to realize that for someone like us, we're trying to grow our rum business, but most of our growth doesn't come from rum. It's not the typical scenario that someone's trading up from rum to Foursquare. They're trading across. They're coming from whiskey. So there's a still a huge
indeed. You do indeed enjoy a fair amount of whiskey nerds loving your product, definitely including myself. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Foursquare is such has attracted so many whiskey fans?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects to that. The first aspect is why is there not the trading up? And the reason is because the rum category that's developed in most of the world, and the US is very typical, is a virtually completely different product to premium Barbados or premium Jamaican rum. So, I mean, the obvious example, take something like Bacardi. If you're a Bacardi drinker, moving from Bacardi to a Barbados or Jamaican rum is, you could as well call it a different category. So that's the first aspect, is to realize, well, the whiskey is the obvious place in the sense that they're not going to trade up in the rum category. Now, why within the whiskey category we do well? Well, all the markers are the same in terms of quality. What I mean is, as a whiskey drinker, you will appreciate, distillate-driven flavors, age-driven flavors. You're going to appreciate complexity that comes from aging, complexity that comes from time, the length and grip of a very old spirit, or mature spirit. Let's use the more precise language. So it's you can jump from whiskey to rum and be very comfortable and pick up the same markers of quality, even if they taste different. And of course, in many cases, rum is a very, very seductive style of taste. So not only do you pick up the natural markers of quality, sort of objective markers of quality, you pick up some subjective factors of rum's inherent nature, that lovely sweet molasses nature, sugarcane nature that sort of caramelized brown sugar and fruitiness that, of course, is very, very seductive. Which, of course, is why it's such a crime to add sugar to rum. I mean, I think you can make a better case for adding sugar to whiskey.
Now, Richard, just because we got some of those, people in rum, don't start encouraging them to bourbon now. Come on now. So
yes,
it looks like there's.
So yeah, for me,
there's,
the whiskey audience is the natural audience. It's a place where if you drink old or good quality whiskey, you're gonna have it very easy to appreciate good old rum.
So it looks like there's looks like there's a lot of interest coming in on like US releases, people wanting to know when are European releases coming over. Please answer all that. But I would like you to talk about the relationship with Total Wine and how they exclusively have doorlies in the United States, because I think they have the best value in all of rum, and it's only at Total Wine.
Yeah, well, what happened was with Total Wine was when we first started exporting a little over 20 years, well, just about 20. Well, it was a few experiments that went wrong, but more or less steady imported a little over 20 years ago. And the natural place for us to export, of course, was England, the UK, to be precise. And we grew Europe from it, taken from the UK. I mean, and I'm talking literally physically taking the stock from the UK. So some European importers would buy from our UK importers, but it's the natural historic link of Barbados and the West Indies. So UK obviously always had an audience for rum. So for a small family business like us, it was our natural place to export to was the UK. The US is very difficult. Unless you sort of walked in front of an importer and said, here's my brand, and we have millions of dollars of marketing budget, people could care less. I mean, no importer would take you on, or at least no creditable importer. No shortage of inadequate importers to take you on. And Total Wine had built this direct model and on wines, which of course lends itself very well to the direct model, because it's arguably not as branded as spirits. And it was privately, it's still privately owned. And so we met the owner. We met one of the two brothers, David, a super nice guy, very down-to-earth guy. And he was intrigued to develop his direct model with spirits, but of course that was near impossible to do with regular brands. And so it was a case of, hey, we're struggling to import. Why don't we do a direct import? Because we got nothing to lose with you. And he was very intrigued to start direct import with spirits. So we're actually one of the earliest direct import spirits of all Total Wine's products. And it got us the opportunity to bring Dorleys to the market. And failing to have the multi-million-dollar marketing program to introduce it, what it basically is in effect is a very, very narrow channel, but a very, very, very well-managed channel. So instead of trying to be an importer and saying, oh, we're going to sell Dorleys in 30 states, and then failing because you've bitten off way more than you can handle, what Total Wine allowed us to do was to grow with them, start with their number of stores in their handful of states, because people forget how they have pretty humble origins. And they've done so well, we've stayed loyal to them. I mean, we're probably in the position that we could now take Dorleys national. but you know, we work kind of on a very, you know, all of our relationships tend to be very personal relationships, not contractual relationships. And, you know, we honor principle of working. So we've stayed loyal. And yes, if we went through national distribution, those products would be substantially higher. Their model allows them to be much, much cheaper.
Mm.
Which
So
of
it
course
looks
is a
like
great
there's
help for us to get started. I mean, right now I could probably, you know, obviously we command higher prices on our other rums, but you know, 15 years ago that was a great help.
So a lot of our questions are coming in now about the general U.S. stigma of rum, and really, I think we could both chalk that up as a lack of education amongst the American consumer, to include bourbon fans who all think that rum is just sweet and, you know, Captain Morgan's kind of stuff. And I've certainly tried to dispel some of that, but you've spent a lifetime, Richard, trying to educate people what proper rum is. So I guess I'll give you the floor here to help out Ben Stahl and Jerry Kersey and Douglas Pendleton and all these fine folks here who've taken the time to join us on the YouTube and chat it up. Tell them what your belief in what real rum is.
Well, I got asked a question recently, something like, you know, what does rum have to do to premiumize? Well, I answered and said, well, rum's been premium for, you know, 300 years. We've been premium as long as any spirit. I mean, you go back, you can find old bottles of old rum in the 19th century, and you know, we've been premium. Just because the premium hasn't been on the shelves and the US is not alone in that, it doesn't mean the premium rum didn't exist. It's existed forever. Part of the problem is that well, it's hard to give as a simple answer, but certainly the post-World War II era was not good for rum, and we really struggled. And a lot of it, as I said, there's many reasons for this, but one reason, for example, is that after sort of post-World War II, you basically have tremendous investment in brands. I mean, the 20th century is investment in brands. The post-World War II is you know, that's when all the household brands of today are really, really developing. And in the Caribbean, we didn't have the money to do that. So most of the development is not shaped by what was happening in where rum is drunk at home, but what's happening in the other markets. And if you take something like Bacardi, you're talking about a product that was tremendously prestigious back in the 20s and the 30s. You know, in Prohibition, people, you know, nipped down to Cuba and you drunk, you know, mojitos and daiquiris in you know, prime establishments. It would seem, I don't want to, you know, seem critical of Bacardi, but it would seem that they've spent then that era, post sort of World War II era, preserving volume and kind of shifting their product a little bit down. And then, of course, you get bombarded with products like Captain Morgan. So if you have a product like Captain Morgan and they've got a marketing budget of, you know, zillions of dollars, and they're doing their education, and the rest of us are ultra tiny, you know, our marketing budget is zero, you know, Appleton's a fraction of Captain Morgan. Well, obviously the education's going to go the way the main brands do it. So rum has been shaped by the big brands, and the big brands are not the quality brands. I mean, contrast that with any other category. So if you're in bourbon, you know, the best quality brands have a marketing say. If you go in Scotch whiskey, the best marketing brands have a say. When you look at rum, the best quality brands are tiny in terms of their education or their reach or their marketing, and they're bombarded and overwhelmed. I remember years ago when Captain Morgan was really first taken off, because we were working on a project with Seagram, who owned it at the time. And they had just launched Captain Morgan Private Stock. as the premium version that they wanted you to trade up to. And it literally was more vanilla and more sugar.
Wow.
In other words, there was no concept of, well, we're going to give you a premium rum and it's going to be, 10 years old or whatever, and pot still or any other. It was, here's the premium. We put more vanilla in it and more sugar in it.
Wow.
So once you have that force, it's very hard to fight against. But we're making tremendous progress in the last couple of years. So I don't want to.
Yeah, I will agree with you that
talking broad picture,
Yeah, I will agree with you that you've made some progress, but I'll just kind of tell you where I sit on it. When I wrote Rum Curious, I poured my heart and soul in that book. I love rum, and then it comes out, and I have to face like everybody who would disagree with me, and it was just like everybody, like every marketing person that represented a brand like Captain Morgan, or a brand ambassador who, had their story to tell me about this or that and why it's traditional. And it just got so old and frustrating,
Yes.
for to have that conversation. And honestly, I don't know how you do it. I mean, I got exhausted. I got exhausted having the conversation about what, rum is, and what it should be, what it could be, and how it can attract, more bourbon consumers. Because I'm sorry, but most of the rum products that are out there will not appeal to a whiskey drinker. Yours will, Mount Gay will, Appleton will, Hampton.
If you looked and read, and you can see a complete correlation or analogy with whiskey, in the sense that there are a handful of whiskey producing countries in the world that will appeal to whiskey drinkers. So if you think of whiskey, you automatically think of, Scotland, Ireland, America, Japan. You might even think of Canada.
Why do you laugh at that? Is it because your wife's Canadian and she likes Canadian whiskey?
My wife's Canadian, so I'm allowed to make Canadian jokes. So if someone brought you a sweet sugar tasting whiskey from India or Philippines or whatever, you would dismiss it instantly. You would know automatically that you wouldn't give it any credence. Well, the same thing applies in rum. There are a handful of countries in the world that make rum, but you can find rum just like you can find whiskey from any country. And that's where you find the oddball and this crazy stuff. I mean, let's be blunt. The rums that come out of several countries, no Jamaican or Barbadian thinks they're rum. Just the same way that if someone brought you a, whiskey from wherever and said, yes, this is bourbon whiskey, you would dismiss them. So that's what happens in rum, is that. So then that's why it's also very easy for people who can be confused about what rum is, because it's very easy to pick up a bottle of rum from wherever and it's sugar, syrupy, sweet, and then dismiss it and dismiss the category.
Yeah.
But the Barbados and Jamaica of the rum world, or like Scotland and Ireland of the whiskey world, and that it in the whiskey world, but you don't know it in the rum world.
Well, we're coming up toward the end of our conversation here, unfortunately, and we've had so many good questions come in on YouTube. Michael Marks had one, right about the middle of our conversation, that your bottles have a lot of details on them about what they were, about what how they were aged and everything. But there's obviously more than just aging that goes into your rums. And he asked a question to explain the processes and differences of your exceptional cask selection series, the single blended rums, specifically 2004, 2006, and 2007.
Well, so we have the two series, and when I say the two series, we have the Exceptional Cask series, and then we have the Velia series. And the distinction between the two of them is purely volume. So if we have a particular release of rum that's going to be small, we're going to do it on the Velia series. Also, the Velia series allows us to do rums that cost more. So I gave the example the other day. I just bought some port casks straight out of the Adega. So we're talking genuine port casks, not seasoned port casks. So very, very expensive. And I basically said, well, you know, that's probably going to be a Velia release because these are the most expensive barrels I've ever bought in my life. And so this is going to be a very expensive rum. So it'll be part of the Velia series. Not necessarily that it's better. It's just, it costs more to make. And if you like it, well, too bad. You got to pay more. And if you don't like it, good. That's lucky you. So the ECS series is the broader series. However, it's still the limited series. So when you look at the vintages, when we did the first Velia, we used a vintage, and I always had, while I had always wanted to name them, we were just a bit nervous to name the first Velia. So we gave it a vintage name, which was on reflection, maybe not the best thing to do, because I decided, because the vintages were large enough, I will keep doing the vintages on the ECS series. So we had that little anomaly. It was just an accident, wasn't by design, where 2004, 5, 7, and 8 are ECS, and 06 is Velia. The vintage on the ECS is kind of our core work, as in pot column distilled, 100% bourbon cask. Whereas when we shy away from that core philosophy, we will then give a named release. So, you know, that's, you know, where the criterions with the Madeira cask and the Dominus or the cognac cask come from. But in terms of how they different from regular, again, it's all about size. So when you're making a product like Norley's 12-year-old, you have to have enough rum every year, style of barrels, everything to maintain that product every year. The beauty of doing a vintage is you don't. So you can make something each year, for lack of a better word, exceptional. So that is how they vary. We get to basically pick what we want to do without worrying about quantity, without worrying, oh, can I make this product every year? As a brand, can I grow this brand? No, I don't. I don't have to do that. So once those shackles are off, those sort of commercial constraints, certainly rum making becomes a lot more fun.
Well, this has been, as always, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, Richard. I always enjoy our time.
Thank you for having me.
You've got so much to add to the conversation of rum, whiskey, and really life. You know, you're just an overall well-rounded guy, and it's always fun to have you on. We'll have to do this again. I can see there's a lot of unanswered questions out there for you, so we'll get together and pick.
Maybe go through them and then we can maybe plan.
Yeah, and maybe we can like reschedule this, because obviously you got a lot of fans out there. Your rum is loved in the bourbon world, and I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, thank you for joining us.
Now we have a lot of time on our hands.
Yeah, we do. We all have a lot of time on our hands, so this might become a regular program, the Richard Seale and Fred Minnick show, complaining about those who don't see rum like us. But, you know, thank you all so much for joining. Thanks to Richard for coming on. Make sure you click that subscribe button for the future times that we are on the air and talking about good rum and good whiskey. Until next time, I'll see you later. Remember, vodka sucks unless it's used for hand sanitizer. Cheers.